onions, that won't change the roses, but it will confuse cooks. They'll want an onion and they'll buy this funny onion and it won't taste right. And in the long term, you might change the roses because people who grow roses will start breeding varieties of roses that smell and taste like onions to satisfy the confused cooks. The words you choose determine the message you communicate, which influences people's thoughts, which later on guide their actions. So it makes a difference what you say. Since 1983, the name GNU has been associated with our ideas of freedom and community, ethical ideas. But the name Linux is not. The name Linux is associated with a different philosophy, that of Mr. Torvalds. And what is it? Well, he doesn't believe that you deserve freedom in using software. He doesn't believe he deserves freedom in using software. He says he's happy to use non-free software as long as it's convenient and reliable. So he has a totally different philosophy based on different values. Well, he has a right to his views. But what happens when people erroneously credit him with developing the GNU system is they admire him tremendously and they copy his views and they don't even think about ours. And the result is they don't learn to value their own freedom. They don't even consider it. They just follow Torvalds. And the result of that is the day when we have to fight for our freedom, they're not with us because they don't see anything to fight for. They're happy as long as they get convenient, reliable software. And when it does something nasty, they don't draw a deep lesson from that. They don't say it's doing something nasty because somebody else controls it and through it has power over me. No, they just say, he should do a better job. You see, freedom is frequently threatened. To keep it, we must defend it. You can see that looking at the history of the world, including the history of Brazil. But in most areas of life, the debate about human rights has lasted decades or centuries, which is plenty of time to arrive at conclusions about what human rights people deserve and spread them around the world. This doesn't mean we always win, but sometimes this enables us to defend human rights. But computing is a very new area of life. Even in the most advanced countries, it's less than 20 years that most people do computing. And in other countries, it's less. That's not much time to have a debate about what human rights a user deserves in using a program. But in fact, there has never really been a debate because almost all users started with proprietary software, surrounded by other users of proprietary software, and they didn't know that there was any other possibility. So effectively, they took for granted that proprietary software is an acceptable alternative, which means they let the proprietary developers dictate the answer to that question. What human rights do you deserve in running a program? And their answer is effectively none at all. They say they can impose any conditions they like, and you just have to accept them. So, who tries to start a debate? We in the free software movement believe we have identified 4 human rights that software users deserve. They are the 4 essential freedoms that define free software. But when we try to bring these ideas to the attention of the users of the GNU system, we encounter 2 obstacles. First of all, they don't know they're using the GNU system. They think it's Linux, and that it was all started by Mr. Torvalds and comes from his vision of life. So when they see the articles where we explain this philosophy, they say to themselves, why should I read what those GNU fanatics write? I'm a Linux user. I'm proud to follow the pragmatic ideas of Mr. Torvalds. I won't read it. Pragmatic, by the way, when people say that a certain philosophy is pragmatic, that tends to mean deciding important long-term issues based on short-term benefits. Well, what they say to themselves is ironic, because really they're using the GNU system and they don't know it. Suppose they knew it. Suppose they said to themselves, I'm a GNU/Linux user, and this is an article from the developers of GNU. They are the people who made this system. I better read it. And then we would have a chance to try to convince them, and maybe we would succeed. So it makes a difference whether they heard you call the system GNU/Linux. Then they might know we're using the GNU system, and they might listen to what we say. But there's another obstacle. Since 1998, most discussion of free software doesn't use the term free software. Most of the people say open source. Why is that? During the 90s, as the GNU/Linux system spread among technical people, many of them recommended it because of practical benefits. They hadn't thought about the issue in terms of freedom, so they didn't discuss that, but they recommended it to their friends because it was powerful, reliable, efficient, flexible, and cheap. So there were two political camps within the free software community. There was the free software movement, those of us who said, we're doing this because we want to live in freedom. And then there was the other camp, the people like Mr. Torvalds, who participated in the free software community, but they didn't consider it an ethical requirement. And there was a debate between the two camps, so newcomers would see the debate and they would find out about the free software movement and what it stands for. But in 1998, the people in the other camp invented a different term, open source, and switched to that. And because the term was new, they had a chance to decide which ideas to associate with their term and which ideas to leave out. They decided to leave out the entire ethical foundation of the free software philosophy. So the difference is not just a matter of using one name instead of another. All the ideas are different too. They don't say if a program is not open source, it's an injustice, it mistreats the users, let's fight to get away from it. They don't say anything like that. They say, and they don't say if you develop a software that in order to treat the rest of the world ethically, you must make it free. Instead, they say that they recommend a development model. They say that if you let the users change and redistribute the software, they will improve the code quality, and that will be a benefit for you. So the difference between these two philosophies is at the foundation, at the level of values. Well, they were the majority in 1998. In addition, the companies in the free software community followed them because most of them did, because most of them had proprietary software products also. And therefore, they didn't want to teach the users to recognize that a proprietary program is an attack on your freedom, because then they wouldn't be potential customers for those proprietary products. Well, most of the politicians and journalists follow the business. And since then, most of the people talking about free software don't say free software. And they don't mention any of our ideas. And when most people hear about me, they think I'm a supporter of open source. Just about every day I get mail from somebody who says he admires what I've done for open source. And I have to write back and say, you've been misinformed. I don't even agree with that. That's the slogan of the people who disagree with me. And then I tell them about the free software movement. Ideas that they probably never heard. They're very familiar with my work, except that they've been given a completely wrong idea of why I did it. And that damages our chances of winning freedom. We need lots of people to join in this struggle if we're going to win. I've seen articles that called me the father of open source. When I see that, I send a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, that it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my consent. And then I explain the ideas of the free software movement. That's the motive for the letter. Of course, I like making a joke, but the point of the joke is to get the reader's attention so that they will pay attention to why I really did this work and to the ideas of freedom that they need to know. Ideas which, of course, were missing in the article, if the article said open source. I'm checking to make sure it's not from Coca-Cola Company. There is a worldwide boycott of Coca-Cola Company because it murders union organizers in Colombia and Guatemala. So don't buy any products of Coca-Cola Company. For more information, see killercoke.org. So, in 1998, those people thought the free software movement would disappear. And often they say that it has. They tell people that open source is a replacement for the free software movement. They describe us as a precursor. Well, we're not that. We work very hard, and the free software movement is still here. But we need your help. We need you to talk to people about free software and say free software, software libre. And when other people are talking about open source, if you insist on saying software libre, then you're helping us. And also, please call the system GNU/Linux whenever you talk about it. That will also help us. Now, those are ways you can help us with a little bit of time. If you've got more time, of course you can do more. You can even learn to give talks like this. That would help us tremendously. We really need more speakers to explain the ideas of free software to people. But if you can't give us that much time and effort, at least call the system by the right name and express your support for the free software movement by saying free software. Because it's very easy to lose your freedom if you're not paying attention. We have lost our freedom several times in the free software community. We got freedom and we lost it again because most people didn't pay attention. They didn't care enough. They had freedom in their hands and they wouldn't close their fingers. So it slipped out between their fingers, and they didn't notice what they were losing. For instance, in 1992, Torvalds liberated Linux, and it was combined with the GNU system, and we got GNU/Linux. It was possible to buy a new PC and install GNU/Linux and run it in freedom. But it was not easy. At that time, to install the system, you had to be a real expert. You had to tinker with it. So people began trying to make it easier. They developed distributions of GNU/Linux designed for easy installation. And a few years later, there were several distributions competing in a community where most people didn't value freedom. So the developers of one distro had the idea, let's put in some non-free programs to do additional things and present that to the users as a bonus, as an advantage. And it worked. More people switched to that distro because they didn't realize they were losing something. So the developers of other distros looked at that and said, they're gaining because of those non-free programs. We had better put non-free programs in our distro too to match their advantages. So they did over the next few years. And then 10 years ago, there were dozens of distros and not one which was free. They all contained non-free software. So when people asked me at the end of a talk, where can I get this system? I had to say, there is no place I can recommend. There are dozens of different versions of GNU/Linux, and every one of them contains non-free software, so I can't recommend it. Well, that meant we had reached freedom, and then we had fallen back and lost it. I'm happy to say that today, there are completely free software distributions of GNU/Linux. You can find the list in gnu.org/distros. They include Ututo, and Blag, and GNUsense, and Triskel, and Parabola, and a few more. These, as you can see, are not the well-known popular distros. Those continue to come with or offer non-free software. So we have begun to recover the freedom that we previously lost. Just begun. And then we lost our freedom in another way. Nowadays, the source code of Linux, Torvalds' kernel, is not entirely free software. Most of it is still free, but there are certain pieces which are not free. In fact, they're not really source code either. In supposed source files, you will find large tables of numbers. And those tables of numbers are really executable programs dressed up as source code. But that's not real source code. The real source code for those programs is not available, so they are not free software. In addition, many of them carry explicit non-free licenses, making them not free software. Well, how did this happen? Torvalds decided to put them in. You see, Torvalds never advocated free software. He never believed that this was an ethical issue. He started developing Linux in 1991 as proprietary software. Then in 92, he made it free. And then some years later, he put in proprietary pieces. And for him, this was not a matter of principle. So he didn't have to wrestle with his conscience. For him, it was just a matter of convenience. And the lesson is, when your freedom depends on somebody who doesn't value freedom, it's precarious. You might lose it just because he thinks something else is more convenient, or more successful, or more profitable, or whatever. Freedom is only secure when it's defended by people who demand freedom. Well, when we found out about this problem in Linux, we couldn't use Torvalds' version of Linux. We can't distribute non-free programs to people. So we had to go through Linux and remove the non-free pieces, which are called binary blobs, by the way. And typically they are firmware programs. They don't run in the central processor. They run in some other processor. And Torvalds convinced himself that that makes them okay. But we don't think they're okay. So we have to make a modified version of Linux, which doesn't have the blobs. And we call this Linux Libre, using the Spanish word, or if you prefer French word, in English. And it's easy to do this because we have a script that goes through and removes the blobs. So every time Torvalds releases a new version, we run the deblobber script and we release the new version. It's not hard work, and it produces something that's free software that we can ethically distribute. It does not achieve replacing the blobs with free software. That is a much bigger job. The fact is, there are some devices, some peripherals, that can't be used in the free world today because we don't know how to run them. That's a fact. You can either show this and admit it, as we do, or you can hide it, as Torvalds does. But either way, you're not running that device in freedom. So what you see, and these are not the only examples, but I will give more, what you see is that our future depends above all on what we value. If we value freedom, then we can hold on to it. If we don't value it, we lose it. Because of this, it's not enough just to give people freedom. If we could magically make free software to do everything today, we could hand it out to people, and tomorrow they could all have freedom, except for the ones whose computers are tyrants and don't allow the users to replace the software. And this is quite a problem nowadays. Many devices, not just Apple and Microsoft devices, but even many Android devices are tyrants and won't let people replace the software. But aside from that, everybody could have freedom tomorrow. But would they still have freedom in 5 years? Only if they care enough to hold on to it. And that's why a crucial part of the free software movement is spreading the idea of freedom. What I'm doing in this talk. We must, to establish lasting freedom, we must teach people to value freedom. And we need your help in that. Especially because nowadays, you can run non-free programs without even knowing that they're installed in your computer. Many web pages contain software written in JavaScript, and usually that software is not free. And lots of people who would refuse to install a non-free program on their computer, or at least would hesitate a lot before they did, they run these web pages and they don't know that they're installing non-free programs on their computer because it goes into the browser and the browser doesn't warn you. So we made a change so it will warn you. We have a program called Libre.js, which checks the JavaScript in a web page and the other files it refers to also, and checks whether it's non-trivial and non-free. And in that case, it refuses to run it, and it warns you this page has non-free, non-trivial JavaScript. It also has a heuristic feature to find where to send a complaint, so that you can complain to the webmasters and say, you shouldn't make people run this non-free JavaScript and I couldn't use your site. It's very important to complain. We've got to put pressure on them to change. In addition, you can lose control of your computing without running a non-free program. There's a new way they can take away your control of your computing, which we call software as a service, or SaaS. The way this works is, instead of doing your computing by running a program that operates on the data you've got, you send the data to somebody else's server, and there, programs you don't know about operate on the data, and they send you the result. Or they take action directly on your behalf. And this way, you have no control over how that computing is done. It's equivalent to running a non-free program. But it's worse. You see, as I said, some non-free programs have spy features that transmit data about the use of the computer to some server. Well, with software as a service, the user has to send all the pertinent data to the server. But it's the same result. That user's data is in the server, and who knows